So if you don't know me, I'm teaching this stuff on YouTube. I have like 180 videos. So if you haven't seen them, there's a lot of catching up to do. I've also worked in the advertisement agency industry. So I worked at agencies all over the place, mostly in Sweden, Stockholm, where I live. Worked with a lot of brands and clients, most recently Lexus, Toyota. So did 7 years with cars. So I have a lot of experience there. But now everything AI, basically. So why would you want to use Flux? So first of all, it's free. And I say free with quotation marks because you actually need a system to run it. So either by using your own hardware with a big GPU or by using cloud solutions like ThinkDiffusion. And it is not in a closed system. It's not, Flux is not proprietary per se. If you're using Midjourney Dolly, for example, those are closed proprietary solutions where you have basically no control at all. You get amazing generations with Flux, prompt understanding. So you can basically use descriptive text like a human does it. In previous versions of open source tools like Stable Diffusion, for example, you had to understand and kind of get to know the way you prompt. So you could be, you could have prompt styles that you loaded onto something, but now you can actually describe it in words, which is very, very good. Hands, finally. Now we can do hands, we can do feet, we can do basically a lot of details. And with that, it's details like text. And then I have extensions here. That's the last one. And if you do a comparison between the closed systems like Midjourney Dolly, you have a lot of extensions with Flux. But since Flux is new, you have more extensions for Stable Diffusion, but we're getting more and more extensions every day. And if you don't know what an extension is, it could be ControlNet, for example, if you've heard that, where you can control poses, architecture. You can even train models, LoRa's, train it on a car, and generate your own images, right? So there's a lot of stuff going on. Just a super quick overview, most popular visual AI. So we talked about Midjourney, Dolly. Those are closed systems. We have open systems, Flux, Stable Diffusion. There's a lot more, Ideogram, many out there, but these are the most popular ones. Today we're going to be using ThinkDiffusion, and like I said previously, this is a cloud solution, so you don't need to have any hardware to run all of these tools. You can use it in the cloud. They're starting up a machine in the cloud for you that you get. It's private. You can do your stuff there. You can have your IP work. So some of the issues people have been telling me, like, hey, I want to use Midjourney, but many of my results are not private. Well, then you can use many of the open source tools like Flux, Stable Diffusion, and those are available on ThinkDiffusion. Why would you use Flux over Stable Diffusion? Stable Diffusion is probably the most famous open source tool because it was probably the big first one. Has a lot of extensions, but it is not up to par when it comes to tech. So Flux is newly released, but is actually surpassed Stable Diffusion as of right now. So Stable Diffusion had a 3.0 release, which was, debatable. Flux did that better. So we have better out-of-the-box generations, good text, some text stuff here, 16-channel VE. So what that means is you get better details. Stable Diffusion, the old ones had a 4-channel VE, very technical. But now you know. So some of the negatives with Flux is it's very resource heavy. So if you don't have a local machine with a big GPU and don't want to use a cloud solution, you're going to have a bad time, right? You need a dedicated graphics card with a big GPU. And many extensions are not developed yet. Flux is, what is it, like couple of months, something like that. Maybe more. But the extensions are not out yet, all of them. but we're getting new stuff every day. So with that, we're going to look at a workflow inside of ThinkDiffusion. Now we're inside of Comfy. And these workflows that we're looking at today are going to be able to download after. Aisha and I is going to send them out. So this is a Flux Dev Workflow. And what's going on here is we have this prompt box. So we have a cinematic photo of a woman Viking in Viking Warrior. She's carrying a Viking wooden shield, an iron sword. We can set our size here. So I'm currently doing a 1024 by 1024. And once we generated this, this is what we're getting, right? I'm also, as you can see, I have some previous generations down here. I have not cherry picked these at all, actually. So I just generated a bunch, hope for the best, and left it here. And that's kind of what's cool about Flux, right? If you do this with the previous versions like Stable Diffusion 1.5, you would have to, like, it's the needle in a haystack kind of thing. You do a lot of generations, you find the one you want, you keep working with that. And with Flux, you get good stuff very, very quickly, which is very, very powerful. Now, if you want to use this workflow, these nodes here are what you want to care about. I put the other stuff down here, but if you're not an advanced user, you don't need to look at this. This is not important for you. We are loading a Flux Dev model, which is currently the best open source model you can use. There is another model called Flux Pro, but that is not available in this use case. There's also a Flux Schnell, a faster one, but I think the results kind of aren't there, so I would prefer to use the dev model. We're loading clip loaders. These are loaded by default. They're called text encoders. And we're loading the VAE. This is what we talked about, the 16-channel VAE. You don't have to bother too much about that. So it's set as default. You have this little resolution table. So once these models are trained, they're trained for a specific resolution. 1024 by 1024, that is your native resolution. So anything you do in 1024 is going to get, best Flux results. But that said, you can do stuff outside of that. So I put a resolution table here. So if you want to do like 3 by 2, 16 by 9, you have the resolutions for that are closest to the native resolution, meaning you will get the best results. Now you can go up to 2 megapixels. In this case, it would be like 1408 by 1408 or square image. And you might think, oh, that I'm going to get a lot more detail. Sure, you will. But as it's natively trained for 1024 by 1024, the results will be better in 1024 by 1024. It's a little caveat there because it depends on what you mean by quality. Pixels, obviously, you get more pixels and more resolution, but in 1024 by 1024, like the general understanding of the image, so to speak, like bodies, how people interact with each other, they're better in the native resolutions, right? Now, we're going to show you, or actually, Aisha is going to send out, I think, 3 workflows. So this is the base one. This is just generating something. You can put any prompt in, get an image out, right? The second one is actually an LLM. So if you don't know what an LLM is, it's a large language model. So this part here is the same, except that we don't have any text in this text box. So we changed the text to be an input. Then we loaded the Sarge LLM node. So here we are loading the large language models, right? It's basically like ChatGPT, right? And we are saying, here are the instructions, generate a prompt from prompt. So this is this box here, right? So it says we're actually giving the instructions generate a prompt from a portrait. So from a portrait, we get a striking portrait showcases an individual with captivating facial features and engaging expressions. The image is expertly crafted to emphasize. You get the point, right? So with very few words, in this case, just two, and one of them is a, so practically one word, you get all of these exquisitely crafted prompts, which I think is very, very powerful. And if you queue this up, you're just going to get a new portrait. And this is also randomized every time, which I think is very cool. If you want to try this for yourself, this LLM model is not pre-installed, but I put a little note up here where you can download it. So you actually have to create a directory and place it in there. And if you're doing this in ThinkDiffusion, you can actually go, let's see, Comfy UI, models. Let's see what we say, LLM GGRF. And what you would do is you would just take this link, copy that, paste that in there, press submit, and it would upload here. I think that's just a very convenient little feature. Once that's finished, just press refresh and the menu here, and you're good to go. So here we got a different portrait, and we could do something else. We could do, let's say, a cyberpunk city. In the same kind of sense here, we're getting a gritty, futuristic metropolis takes center stage in this electrifying image depicting a dystopian cyberpunk landscape. You might ask yourself, why are you doing this? Why is it this important? Well, because this model has been trained on human language, descriptive language. The more information you give it, the better it gets, right? So you can say just a cyberpunk city and let that be the prompt, but you will get a better result if you give it a longer descriptive prompt, which is the case in Flux and not specifically in Stable Diffusion. So we looked a little bit at Flux Dev, how to get started. So this is a basic workflow that you will be able to get. You can change the prompt here. You can change the width, the height. We looked at the LLM here. And some of you might be thinking, well, okay, I want to do the native resolutions, but I still want them bigger. Well, we can do that. So I actually prepared a third workflow for you here. So this is, if you remember our first workflow, as you can see, this part, this is the same. But then we have connected an Ultimate SD Upscale. So this is an old extension that was actually used for Stable Diffusion. And we have connected an Upscale model. There are a few to choose from. You can also go into your manager here, install models. Let's say you want the CX, for example. You can find that in there, press install. And it says here type upscale. So you can actually check if you're getting the right one. So in this case, we are generating first a 1024 by 1024 image. We are then, through this Ultimate SD Upscale, we're upscaling by a factor of 2. So it will be 2048 by 2048, if my math is correct. And what's cool about this is it's actually a tiled upscale. And what that means is it breaks this image up into 4 parts. And you can see that here. Here's actually the bottom right part. And why is it doing that, you might ask? Well, remember we talked about the native resolution being 1024 by 1024, right? So we take 1024 boxes, tiles, and we render them one by one to make the bigger image. That way, we can stay in the native resolution to get the better quality and still achieve a bigger image. And you can keep on doing this. I mean, you can, I've actually added multiple of these, and I've gone up as high as 48,000 by 48,000. So I have this huge cityscape. We can zoom in and like basically look at the tiniest details. And you can clearly see also, if you look at, now this skin got a little plasticky, but just look at, we can clearly see this image isn't super high res, right? And just go to the right one here, and it's much, much clearer. Again, the little plasticky skin that got reinforced, so make sure that you're upscaling an image that you're happy with, right? But the details on the helmet here, I think are very, very good. Again, compare that to this. Looks a little low resolution. So this is an introduction to getting started with Flux. And some of you might be thinking, oh, this looks very complicated, all these nodes and weird lines going all over the place. Well, the cool part about this is you take the JSON file, which is the workflow, you drag and drop it, and everything is preset for you. And that's really the power of Comfy. You don't have to learn how to connect all of these nodes. Obviously, it's good to know. It's important if you want to build your workflows and do more advanced stuff, but you can get by just using other people's workflows. And you're going to be able to use all three of these. Any questions so far? Let me check. I haven't checked the chat here. If you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. T-Bolt asks, does anyone know if Black Forest could release the Pro model for personal local use? I don't think that will be possible, I'm afraid. They have kept that behind their API, and I believe they will continue to do so. He then also asked, doesn't this LLM part, and that was this part, right, take up space in VRAM and limit graphics generation? Yes, it does take up space in your VRAM. I'm currently using a 48 gigabyte machine, the Ultra machine on ThinkDiffusion. So I'm running this fairly fast. Now, there's always a startup time with this. So there are a lot of models to be loaded into memory. So that will take a couple of minutes. But once everything's loaded, every new generation is quite fast. But if you're on a lower end system, like a 12 gigabyte 16, yes, you might have to scale down. There are also other LLM models that can be used. There is the Mistral, like Q1, for example, takes less space. You can also use the Flux, let's see, Flux Dev FP8, which also takes up less VRAM. I prefer to use the max ones. I mean, I'm using the Ultra 48 gigabyte here, so let's see what else we got. Francois asked, where's the workflow for Sarge? If you're asking about this one specifically, Aishna will send that out.
Got it. I'm just updating that on the same link, all three of them. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, they should be the ones I sent you previously. Martin asks, how long did it take to generate any of these in ThinkDiffusion? I can actually show you that live. So if we start here, I'm just gonna make sure that the change. Here we go. So I'm going to start a generation right now. And we can see it coming in here live. So a few seconds and we have a new 1024 by 1024 from Flux Dev FP16. So that is the maximum quality model as of right now. What about using a Realism LoRa? Can you explain where within the workflow would you connect that node? So if you want to use a LoRa, if you double click, you get nodes. So you can take load LoRa, and that would go between, let's see. So you can basically just take from the low diffusion model, send that into model up there, and then you have to go down here into this one, model sampling flux. You can basically put it wherever you want in the model chain, as long as it's somewhere in between there, right? You also have to connect the clip. So put the clip from the clip loader and then a clip into the prompt. So now we can load a LoRa here. Now we have to load a Flux LoRa, so you can't use any of your old Stable Diffusion LoRas. And if you want to use multiples, you can connect them like this, right? And then take from this, go down to the other ones. There are also other nodes where you can have multiple LoRas in one node. But I found using this is just as convenient because then you don't have to install any custom nodes for that. There are a lot of questions here, so I will probably miss a few of them. So if I am, then feel free to put them again. I'm just going to see what I got here. Is there a way in the workflow to choose whether or not to take an image to the upscaler, or is it best practice to just stop the runtime? Right. So we're talking about this workflow, right? So let's say that you want to generate some new people here, right? But you don't want to go through the step of upscaling because that takes some time. It takes 4 times the amount of time to upscale this than to actually generate the image. What you can do is you can disable this node or bypass it. You can do this either by pressing Control or Command B, which turns it purple, or you can right click and find the bypass. There it is. So if something is purple, it is bypassed, it is disabled. So now we will just use these nodes. So that is a way to quickly enable and disable something in your workflow. Calvin asks, oh, Matt already answered that, but he asked about, he said he worked with Comfy UI locally and have a lot of models, and he wanted to transition to ThinkDiffusion. Preserve the workflow files because ThinkDiffusion will auto-download amazing loads. Yeah, it's like Matt said, imagine ThinkDiffusion as another computer. There's a lot of stuff pre-installed, models, nodes, but anything that isn't pre-installed, you have to install manually. So if you're dropping in a brand new workflow, maybe something you've downloaded from the internet, a friend has sent, a lot of nodes will be red. You would have to go in like locally, you would have to go into your manager, install missing, and any missing custom nodes will be in a list here. Now we don't have any missing, but you get the point. Ralph asks, when comparing Forge and Comfy UI, which one is better to use and what are its advantages? This is a great question and also a very hard question. Forge and Comfy UI, for the people that don't know, are different user interfaces. interfaces, right? So the one we looked at today, that's Comfy UI, all the spaghetti nodes. Forge is built on top of the code Comfy UI, but it looks different. So if anyone has used Automatic 1111 in the past, it looks basically exactly like that. And the way you can use Forge is more similar to how you work with something in Photoshop. You have your tools, you have your variables, your sliders. So it can be a more of an iterative process on your image, where in Comfy, you build the workflow around what you're doing. I actually cannot say that one is better because I use them both. So it depends on what you want to do, right? Let's say that I want to in-paint something. I think in-painting in Forge Automatic 1111 is much better than actually building a workflow or downloading a workflow for in-painting in Comfy. Because even if you are very, very proficient in Comfy, you're still taking time from working on your image when you're building the workflow. If you're using Forge or another UI where everything is preset, the workflows are kind of already built. However, with that said, when you are using Comfy, there is no limit. You can build anything. You can build any feature, any tool, which you cannot do in Forge. So let's say, for example, that we talked about my image that I upscaled to 48,000 by 48,000, right? I wouldn't be able to do that in Forge because I built a custom workflow to do that specifically in Comfy. So for a lot of special features, you can build the stuff yourself in Comfy. And that is why I love Comfy, but I also love Forge and Automatic 1111. Depends on what I want to do. Gopi asks, can we edit the LLM generated text? In this specific workflow, we cannot edit the text. However, you can take the text and you can, let's say that you convert input the width, let's see, our text widget. So you can take this text and copy it into this one. So now we have disabled the input to this. So now we're not running the LLM output into the prompt anymore. Now we have a text prompt. So I just copied that from there to there. So that's how you can work or edit the LLM prompts. Someone asked, will you talk about in-painting with Flux? I will, but not today. That's probably a whole session. It works surprisingly well, I must say. Much better than it did with Stable Diffusion. So I'm very happy with in-painting with Flux so far. I will probably make a video on it. I just haven't had the time yet. So if you are following me on YouTube, you will see an in-painting video in the feed sometime soon. See a lot of questions here. Some I see have been answered in the chat already. Can you sell images created with Flux Dev in terms of licensing? First, I gotta say, I'm not a lawyer. I am not well versed in that, but my understanding is that any output from Flux Dev you can use for anything commercial. The limitation is taking the model and selling that, the use of that. But any output you do, you can use for commercial purposes. That's my understanding of the license. This is not a question, but more of a comment. New features, for example, ControlNet are first available under Comfy, so devs have to work to release Forge-compatible versions. It is true that most new features are released first for Comfy. Did the guys at Black Forest, so if for anyone that doesn't know, Black Forest are the creators of Flux, and they were actually a research team with Stability AI. So they worked to create the original Stable Diffusion. They then left, the whole team left Stability AI, created Black Forest, made Flux. And the question is, did the guys at Black Forest do anything fundamentally different than create their Flux models like Stable Diffusion did before? I know it's a titanic task, but I wonder how technically different it is. I don't know too much about the details. I just know that they trained it with better technical ground to stand on, so to speak. The earlier Stable Diffusion models were a test, kind of. With Flux, they have, well, they learned from what they did and made something better.